the height of his aim, the breadth of his achievements, the record of his past, and the promises of his future. All these bespeak the largesse of size, that magnitude of effort, that intensity of devotion, and that importance of accomplishment. He came to lead this nation at a time of uncertainty and danger, pouring out his own strength to renew the strength and the purpose of all of the people of this nation and of the nation itself. He is the head of our nation and of our party, our commander-in-chief and our chief diplomat, our chief executive and our chief spokesman, and the chief repository of our hopes and our fears, our advice and our consent, our complaints, and yes, our prayers. I am very proud that we have in our midst President Lyndon Johnson, President of the United States.
It was clearly not an expression of how he felt about Johnson, and he sounded phony and was phony.
America is Hard to See is a poem by Robert Frost. It's a poem about Columbus getting lost on the seas and finally, in a confused way, finding America. And it's also about American confusion. The poem begins, "There had been something strangely wrong with every coast he tried along. He could imagine nothing barrener. The trouble was with him, the mariner. He wasn't off a mere degree. His reckoning was off a sea. America is hard to see. Less partial witnesses than he, in book on book, have testified they could not see it from the outside, or inside either, for that matter. We know the literary chatter. Indeed we do, for Robert Frost presented the image of a simple homespun poet. The homespun part was a put-on. He was a sophisticated and hard man. The Kennedys despised Eugene McCarthy. In 1960, McCarthy had the gall to nominate Adlai Stevenson to the presidency of the United States at the Democratic National Convention. The Kennedys felt that that was Jack's year, and it was Jack's year. He was nominated and elected and assassinated in 1963. It was shortly after I made America is Hard to See that I realized that Jack Kennedy had to be killed. It was not an accident. It wasn't a single lone assassin like Lee Harvey Oswald. I saw three entities. A, the CIA, plus the anti-Castro, what we call now freedom fighters, the anti-Castro soldiers who fought in the Bay of Pigs, or by reactionary Southerners who opposed the theoretical ideas of John F. Kennedy concerning blacks, and finally, perhaps by those who knew that he was indeed going to wind down the war in Vietnam, not for moral reasons, but because Jack Kennedy was a pragmatist and it wasn't going to work, and it cost him his life.
In August of '67, at a meeting of the National Student Association in College Park, Maryland, Al Lowenstein came down, and we were talking about a variety of ways in which we might be able to bring pressure to end the war, and Al suggested that if we could put together a nationwide student operation, a base of a student operation, and that he and some others would try and put together a political operation around the country, that we might be able to find ourselves a candidate.
As long as you're dissenters, you're limited. As long as the opposition, once the opposition to the war became a matter of political opposition, of course your ceilings were off. This was what people didn't understand in appraising Gene McCarthy's strength. He converted a small dissent movement into a large political opposition.
New Hampshire office, the only exposure that actually was on the body of Lyndon Johnson. He had one nerve exposed, and that was the nerve that could be wrapped by votes. And the rap that we could give it with this primary, using the right vehicle, either a write-in campaign for Robert Kennedy or a live active campaign by Gene McCarthy, that could conceivably hit that nerve and do what ultimately it did do. that was the basis, but we didn't have the vehicle until Gene McCarthy came on the scene.
When we were looking for a candidate, I'd gone one day to have lunch with Bob. We discussed it in some detail. And he said, no, if I run, everybody will say that I'm doing it for personal reasons against the president. And Gene McCarthy's the person who should do it. Gene, and we talked a little bit about the problems of strategy. I remember one thing on which Bob was very wrong. He said, tell Gene, when he goes into New Hampshire, to make this an adult enterprise, not a children's crusade.
When he arrived at the airport, we had about 50 or 75 people meet him with posters saying, McCarthy for president, please run. We called up all the papers and had photographers there. And then after he spoke at the dinner that evening, he didn't know about it, but we had put out leaflets and put up posters about an impromptu rally for 9 p.m. outside the Continental Hotel where he was speaking in Cambridge. We got a flatbed truck, about 1,000 people showed up, all with signs saying McCarthy for president, run baby run. And that was really the first McCarthy rally.
I don't know what Senator McCarthy is going to do. I'm not sure that he knows what he plans to do.
My decision to challenge the President's position and the administration's position has been strengthened by recent announcements out of the administration. The evident intention to escalate and to intensify the war in Vietnam, and on the other hand, the absence of any positive indications or suggestions for a compromise or for a negotiated political settlement. I am concerned that the administration seems to have set no limit to the price which it's willing to pay for a military victory. I'm also concerned about the bearing of the war on other areas of the United States' responsibility, both at home and abroad. The failure to appropriate adequate funds for the poverty program here, for housing, for education, and to meet other national needs. I intend to enter the Democratic primaries in 4 states, Wisconsin, Oregon, California, and Nebraska. The decision with reference to Massachusetts and also New Hampshire will be made within the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Senator McCarthy said, Dave, I'd like to come into the New Hampshire campaign, New Hampshire primary. And this set me back a little bit, and I said, well, can I announce it tomorrow? And I said, well, now I've got him, I'm going to nail him with a press release. We're going to get this thing going.
People began coming in, extraordinary people who went on subsequently to work in the national campaign, many of whom have become nationally known, graduate students and others who just said, here I am. And we said, well, for how long? You've got an hour, you've got today or weekend. I said, I'm here.
They sent us down to a little town called Salem, and we rented a storefront, and we couldn't find anybody who liked McCarthy or who even knew who he was. One minister was quite friendly, but he said, don't use my name, for God's sake, and anything, because everybody around used John Birch, and they're hawks, and it's just terrible.
So it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when I arrived, and I woke up press secretary, Cy Hirsch, and I said, what national press do you have? I had been in 2 presidential campaigns before then, in 60 and 64. And I knew a lot of the reporters, and I wanted to know who was there. He said, we don't have anybody. There wasn't a single reporter, not even a man from the wire services covering McCarthy at that point.
Probably our single greatest problem with Senator McCarthy was that he had no recognition. He didn't want to poll, we didn't want to poll. We knew damn well it'd be too discouraging at the very beginning. People simply didn't know who he was.
So I said, well, we'll get a typewriter and a secretary and we'll draft something. He said, we don't have a typewriter and a secretary. And it was literally true. There wasn't either a typewriter nor a secretary on the campaign at that stage in Berlin. So I said, well, I have a typewriter in my car, which I did. So I brought it and used it, and we typed up the statement. And the next day we showed it to McCarthy, and he used it, released it. And of course, he released it to nobody, since there wasn't any press there. So then Cy got on the phone. I said, now call up the New York Times, the Washington Post, the wire service, and the networks. Don't tell any of them that nobody else is here, but just say, why aren't you covering this? You made a major statement on the Gulf of Tonkin. And